All right, welcome everyone for joining us. I'd like to introduce our General Director, Christina Scheppelmann, who's going to start us off with some brief introductory remarks.
Thank you, Alex. Welcome all. I'm Christina Scheppelmann, General Director of Seattle Opera. And before anything else, I would like to begin acknowledging that we're speaking on the ancestral homeland of the Coast Salish people. This acknowledgement reminds us to strive for respectful partnerships with all communities as we search for collective healing and true reconciliation, which will take active dialogue. The Seattle Opera staff, particularly our equity team, has been doing important racial equity work prior to my arrival. I'm honored to be joining and supporting these efforts and extremely proud of what the staff has accomplished and supported wholeheartedly. So rest assured that racial equity will continue to be prioritized under my leadership. We know there is still much work to be done in the opera industry and way beyond. And we know that a commitment to anti-racism must be ongoing, and it will take a discourse and efforts over generations, because unfortunately there's no quick fix to it. But we're all committed to be part of this dialogue and these efforts. I'd like to thank Dominica Myers, who created our Racial Equity and Social Impact Plan and led our staff equity team. Dominica was our Associate Director of Administration, but she has just left for a newly created position as Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at King County Library Systems. And we're happy for her, sad for us, but what a fantastic and perfect job for Dominica and for going beyond Seattle Opera and having an impact in our community with her effort and her work and her expertise on the subject. So now, without further ado, I'm very happy to introduce our moderator, Alex Manami, who you've already heard briefly, as well as members of our staff who are going to talk through the equity plan and answer your questions. And I hope you do have questions, because we would like this to be an active conversation and also explain whatever might not be clear as we lay out our equity plan. So Alex, please take it from here.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Christina. Here, let me just pull up my notes here. Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Alex Minami. My pronouns are he and him, and I am the Community Engagement Manager here at Seattle Opera. It's a sincere honor for me to be moderating today's conversation. This discussion is part of a series that we began actually back in 2017 to address social issues and themes of operas presented during our season as they relate to us today. And it is also a forum for discussing social issues as they relate to Seattle Opera as a company and the opera industry as a whole. For today's conversation, I am so honored to be joined by members of Seattle Opera's equity team, as well as additional members of our leadership team, each of whom will have an opportunity to introduce themselves in more detail in just a few moments. But today we will be discussing the initiatives that we have committed to undertake as part of Seattle Opera's new Racial Equity and Social Impact Plan, which will serve to guide us and hold us accountable as we continue down our path toward becoming an anti-racist, multicultural organization. Throughout this conversation, viewers are welcome to ask questions via the Q&A button, and I will do my level best to incorporate as many of your questions as possible as we continue this discussion. And lastly, before we launch into the conversation today, I would like to address just a few remarks to the Black and Indigenous people and people of color who are on this panel today, those who are not on this panel, but who serve on Seattle Opera's equity team, as well as any others who have contributed to the development of the Racial Equity and Social Impact Plan. I would just like to acknowledge that by entering into this conversation and engaging in this work, you all have added to the emotional labor that you already carry in abundance as you navigate the world on a daily basis. And I want to thank you and honor you for having done that. Alrighty, so without further ado, let's launch right in. I'd like to start with our Director of Human Resources, Nancy Del Villarvive. Nancy, as Director of Human Resources, I was wondering if you could spend a couple of minutes just taking us back to the beginning of this journey, providing some background for us on the about the staff equity team, how it got started, how it's comprised, and what its role is at Seattle Opera.
Sure. Hi. So I'm the Director of Human Resources at Seattle Opera. I joined the company back in 2015, and shortly after that, the City of Seattle was hosting free trainings around racial equity for arts organizations. They decided to start that initiative with arts organizations. We had 2 of our directors participate, as well as our general director and an additional staff member at that time. At that time, one of the action points, I think as many nonprofit organizations that I'm aware of, we saw the need to create an equity team. So we started that, and we had kind of an overwhelming participation of several staff members that are invested in the work, and not only in doing racial equity work at Seattle Opera, but also in the community at large, and many of them were already involved in efforts in the community, which was definitely an advantage to us, because we had people that deeply understood what the work in front of us looked like. In the early days, we spent much time putting together ideas of what areas we would like to affect within Seattle Opera and what kind of was our wish list of things that we wanted to do. And a year later, in 2016, we were fortunate to lure Dominica Myers over, and she was able to help us operationalize the work and create concrete steps for us moving forward. So she will be talking next about those next steps that we're taking as a company.
Thank you very much, Nancy. Actually, if we can now turn to Dominica Myers, our unfortunately now former Associate Director of Administration. We'd love to hear, as the individual who largely spearheaded the efforts to develop the Racial Equity and Social Impact Plan. I was wondering, Dominica, if you could just give us sort of a broad level overview of the Resi Plan, some of its key elements and initiatives, as well as kind of walk us through the process of how it was developed, how data was collected from the various stakeholders in the Seattle Opera community, and how it was adopted. So it was a big topic.
Hi, thank you, Alex and everyone. Yeah, so let's talk about, I guess, the assessment process and how we went through that. It was, first of all, really helpful that there was already an equity team that had been in place since 2015, and that there were multiple staff directors, from the leadership team who were involved with the equity team already, or part of the equity team. It's really important to have that leadership buy-in when going about, especially going through an assessment and planning process around these things. Let me see. So the assessment process was, let me see. It started with the development of, or let me back this up. The way that I went about this was actually to use a strategic planning, what you would use for a strategic planning process, except to employ a racial equity and social impact lens to the strategic plan, or to that process. And so, I started with, I started really with some semi-structured interviews, especially with the directors, just to get a nice bird's eye view of the organization, what's already in place, so that when we took the time to drill down in, later on, I would already kind of have a good sense of what's going on across the organization. I think originally looking at what was already in place for the company and what we wanted to accomplish is that I think previously the work of equity was sort of the expectation was that the programs and partnerships was going to, or previous to that it was called Education and Community Engagement Department. That was the department that would handle that, and and marketing would kind of communicate externally about it. But for the most part, it was just sort of this expectation that equity work was what we did out in the community. But really, in reality, and not just for this company, but for any nonprofit organization, any organization in general, really that work has to be spread out across the organization and touch all parts of the organization. So that was the sort of the idea around putting together a strategic plan around this. So going back to the assessment process, we developed a survey, a pretty robust survey actually, that that kind of I took kind of some of the data points or some of the kinds of questions that City of Seattle Race and Social Justice Initiative, or the RSJI, had been using, and City of Seattle's been doing this work, I think, since 2003, so for quite some time. And so just kind of taking some of the work that the survey work that they had already done, taking a look at some of the questions that they would ask, and then also taking a look at the continuum on becoming an anti-racist multicultural organization. And that continuum lists kind of some data points that a company would use to look at some of their current practices that might indicate that on one end of the continuum, a company that is exclusive and frankly white exclusive, and kind of going along that continuum toward sort of this other end of the spectrum being a fully realized multicultural and anti-racist organization within a society that is also, of a similar measure, and and what would that look like in reality if that were the kind of the true utopia of anti-racism and multiculturalism, and so taking some data points from there to kind of see, well, if we were to move Seattle Opera along that continuum, what would be some of those data points that would indicate that we're getting there? So that's kind of how the survey was constructed. And it also was constructed so that it could be disaggregated. The data coming in could be disaggregated by stakeholder groups. So that might, it could be disaggregated by staff departments. And the stakeholder groups are like, the staff, the board, Seattle Opera Guild, Bravo, which is the under 40 group for the opera. Just that there's different states to be able to disaggregate and see how different stakeholders are answering these same questions. There were 233 responses and a lot of really rich quantitative data. The qualitative data is just using the standard kind of SWOT analysis with the the dot voting that we did with each of the staff departments, with kind of some big sheets of paper where we could write down what are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to the organization, and with the threats being, what are the threats to the organization if we're not doing this work? And so that was really great sort of qualitative information to get back from staff members. What do they think our strengths are through a racial equity and social impact lens? What are our weaknesses, opportunities, and then what are the threats to the organization if we're not doing this work? And then, from there, we had a huge amount of quantitative data, a huge amount of qualitative data that, we kind of put into one SWOT analysis based on, how many answers are we seeing over and over and over, and kind of putting that into the SWOT. And then from there, creating some recommendations along with, working with the senior leadership to kind of figure out what the recommendations would be for, what the company could be doing as part of a plan, and then finally shaping it into the plan that hopefully everybody has looked at online. It's available on the Seattle Opera website. You can pull it up and take a look at it. So I guess I'm actually going to pull it up on my screen. I don't know if you want me to share that or not, Alex, but but just looking at strategic priority, we basically brought it down to 3 strategic priorities for the organization with desired outcomes that roll up underneath each of those strategic priorities. And then with supporting initiatives, that way those initiatives are you know, again, going back to wanting to sort of spread the wealth of and really spread the responsibility of all parts of the organization to have a piece of the plan to be able to move the company forward along that continuum of becoming an anti-racist multicultural organization. So really, I guess to talk about I'll just overview of the 3 strategic priorities. I won't go into all of the initiatives.
Yes, if you could just cover sort of the strategic priorities and the desired outcomes that are associated with them.
Yeah, I can do that. Okay, so strategic priority number 1 is to formalize and implement racial equity and social impact practices and policies across all stakeholders and departments of the company. With the desired outcome of Seattle Opera commits to the process of intentional institutional transformation based upon anti-racist analysis and identity. And, you know, really, we already knew that we wanted this to go across all stakeholders. But, you know, kind of going back to that quantitative data, the data really came back that there were certain parts of the organization that feel really confident about what racial equity work is for the company or could be for the company, and how you know, understanding the definitions around it. You know, there was just a lot of different people along, you know, the spectrum. Some folks who didn't understand a whole lot, and some people who really understood a lot. And so we wanted to, you know, formalize across the organization and give everyone a piece of the responsibility. Strategic priority number 2, increase the percentage of stakeholders who understand and participate in Seattle Opera's racial equity and social impact work. Again, understand and participate in the work. The desired outcome being Seattle Opera stakeholders hold a shared vision of an institution and wider community that has overcome systemic racism and all other forms of oppression. And with this one, this really also came out of the survey data that we were getting back. Was really that again, there were some folks who had actually who indicated that they had never attended a racial equity training before, and we wanted to be sure that there was ample opportunity for everybody across the organization to have access to the, you know, the definitions that we're talking about, to, you know, have a toolkit to and then also just have access to trainings, and you know, have that our leadership has access to coaching, that sort of thing. So so that's, you know, where that came from. It came right out of the survey data that would be a necessary priority. And then lastly, the strategic priority number 3 is to increase the company's racial and ethnic diversity across all stakeholder groups to reflect the diversity of the Puget Sound region. The desired outcomes being that anti-racist multicultural diversity becomes an institutionalized asset, and that members across all identity groups are full participants in decisions that shape the institution and include an inclusion of diverse cultures, lifestyles, and interests. So again, you know, there were things that came out of probably both the quantitative and qualitative data that you know, the opera's diversity at the leadership level and across all departments. You know, some departments being more diverse than others. We wanted to see that and across stakeholder groups, really, that we just wanted to see an increased diversity that really would become an institutionalized asset. So
yeah, fantastic. No, that's great. And then walk us through sort of when this got started and where we are now with this plan.
Sure.
The early days, I know, but
yeah, this has actually been a work in progress since 2018. That was basically when I got the go ahead to get started on the assessment process. And you know, at the same time, we were also moving into, I don't know if anybody remembers that, you know, that our administrative office was actually in an old furniture warehouse building, and had been there for many years. And so, you know, and then we opened, my point being, we opened the Opera Center in 2018. And so there was some other work going on as we were starting to embark on this. So really the survey process, you know, the initial, you know, sort of semi-structured interviews that I had with leadership happened in 2018, but then the survey stuff really kind of got pushed to 2019 as we were just kind of getting into the new building. So that was deployed in 2019. The SWOT analyses were happening in 2019. We got a new general director in 2019. So, so that, this has been a company that's, has had a lot of transformation going on within the past couple of years, but I'm really just proud of the way that, the equity team and also the staff directors have just been really adamant and persistent that we complete this and that we get it done. So really we sort of internally completed the overall plan at the end of 2019. But we also, again, we'd just gotten a brand new general director and trying to get her onboarded and introduce her to the whole Seattle Opera family, as well as the regional arts and cultural leaders, and but at the same time to start implementing this plan. So it's been a kind of a process of, okay, we've got this plan, here it is, let's also get an implementation plan going. So that's been part of the process as well, is each of those initiatives has to have somebody who's responsible for it. So each of the is this the part I'm talking about, or is somebody else talking about this part? But
no, this is a good place to mention it here, that I think
yeah.
we only just recently launched the plan, and sort of where we are now is where you were just what you were just speaking about, which is that every department now is kind of going over the plan and deciding or fleshing out the supporting initiatives that are within the plan, and assigning it to an actual sort of owner of that initiative as well. So no, I think that was a pretty comprehensive overview. Thank you, Dominica, and thank you for I can't thank you enough and repeatedly enough for all of your leadership in developing this plan. And just as you walked us through the past couple of years here, I only started in 2018, and it's interesting to look back and realize what a journey it's been during these past 2 years and all of the changes that have happened. But I think in my short time here at Seattle Opera, I think one of the most meaningful things that I participated in was the development of the Racial Equity and Social Impact Plan. So I'm very happy to have started at a time when we were just getting that off the ground. All right, let's see. I lost my notes here. Let me pull that back up one more time. What I'd like to do now is sort of turn to the rest of the panelists on our little webinar here today. I was wondering if everyone can go through and just give us a chance to get to know you a little bit more. Introduce yourselves, tell us what your pronouns are, what your role is at Seattle Opera, whether you're a member of the equity team, and also if you could just share with us why this work is important to you. And we're just going to go through here in sort of alphabetical order of people's first names. So Alejandra, if we could start with you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us today. My name is Alejandra Vallarino Boyer, pronouns she, her. I'm the Director of Programs and Partnerships, which is the department that oversees learning programs, community engagement, and social impact for the organization. As a Latina born in Puerto Rico, this is meaningful to me personally. It was like Alex was saying, it's one of the most meaningful parts of my job and what I've been able to be involved in here at Seattle Opera, and also one of the key reasons why I was interested in this position as I came over in 2018. So I'm just really impressed and grateful to be with an organization that really values racial equity and its impact on the work that we're doing.
Thank you so much, Alejandra. And next we've got Arin Derhakopian, our artistic director.
Hello, I'm Aryan Derhakopian, Director of Artistic Administration and Planning at Seattle Opera. Pronouns are he, him, and I've been with the company since 2007 professionally, and volunteer work a little bit before that. But basically my department, with the guidance of the General Director, does the artistic planning of the future in conjunction with other departments and their activities. I always say artistic department is responsible for all the humans that create the art, which is everyone on stage, in the pit, stage management, music staff, librarian. And so we all work very hard to bring the various products or the artistic needs of the products in which we have. So therefore, our work is extremely important, particularly regarding all of these initiatives and how we move forward as a company to make sure that the way we think in the future regarding racial equity, social justice is just part of how we think, period. Not an added feature that we have to add or think about, it's just how we function. Now, I have been here since 2007, and some things I've seen done very well that I've been part of in this decision making, and some things, oh, we could have done that better. So it is a learning and developing process, and it's fantastic that we are now in this stage and taking the formal steps to make sure that the future of this company is bright, including racial equity and social justice issues. Thanks.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Aaron. Next, we've got Catherine Merlot from our development department.
Hi, my name is Catherine Merlot. My pronouns are she and her. I've been with Seattle Opera for 6.5 years. I've been on the equity team since 2015, and I currently am our senior individual giving officer in development. Our team builds relationships with donors to generate financial resources so that Seattle Opera can create the art and programming that you love. My background is in filmmaking and art history. I grew up in the California Central Valley, and I'm a bisexual woman married to a South Asian immigrant. My longevity at Seattle Opera is almost entirely because of the company's commitment to racial justice work. Right now, the development team is primarily focused on strategic priorities 2 and 3 of our RESI plan, building a shared understanding of racial equity work across our current stakeholders, and in our case, our donors, and diversifying who those stakeholders are, as well as working to adopt a community-centric fundraising practice. As a fundraiser, I sit at the intersection of the tension between white wealth privilege, stereotypes of who opera is for, what opera is, and a lot of hope and promise for how our RESI plan, coupled with a community-centric fundraising model, can change the way that we see donors as a part of our organizational narrative at Seattle Opera.
Thank you so much, Catherine. All right, and we've already heard from Dominica, but we didn't really give you a chance to speak sort of more personally about your history with the company and why this work is important to you. So I was wondering if we can come back to you, Dominica.
Oh, I don't know if I was ready for that. So I was with Seattle Opera for 4 years, and you know, I think when the company first where the company was at the time that I was hired, it was, you know, the discussion was about creating access for all, creating an organization that was inclusive of, you know, of all races and all people. And I think, you know, one thing that's, and that was honestly why I was interested in coming to Seattle Opera. I guess my background, I have a bachelor's degree in theater arts and then a master's in nonprofit leadership. And, you know, theater is a kind of a cousin to opera, but I came to find very quickly that opera is a whole different beast from theater. But so I guess the really cool thing is that I'm glad to see that, you know, going from the sort of the access for all aspirations has actually gotten more nuanced in, you know, by coming together with, you know, the equity team, and also with putting together this Resi plan. We call it Resi, or that's kind of the internal name for it, racial equity and social impact, Resi. So if you hear that, that's what that means. Anyway, I'm really glad to just see the nuance that's been added around that.
Yeah, thank you. And could you remind us, you were the sort of facilitator for the equity team as well. How long did you serve as the facilitator?
From 2018, basically. Okay. As soon as we kind of got
from the get-go.
Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Alrighty, and then next up we've got Christina, our marketing director.
Hi, I'm Christina Murti. I'm the Director of Marketing and Communications, and I use she, her pronouns. I have been on the equity team for a couple of years, not the entire time that it has existed at the company. And I've been with us for about 20 years. This work is important to me personally. I have mixed race children, and so I want them to be proud of their mother and the company that she works for. So I want to see us do good work in that area. In terms of the audiences, what my role is here, of course, is bringing audiences to all of our programs. And one thing that's always really lovely and affirming is when you're in a space where there's audiences and people are having a great time and are enjoying their time with friends and family, because what we really know is that these are important memory makers for people to gather with their friends and family, and that's meaningful for them. So I really want to see us grow the people who enjoy that and who want to take part in that. That's what I'd like to see us do. So that's why I'm involved with this work.
So thank you so much, Christina. Next up, we've got Marissa.
Hello, I'm Marissa Betzal. I'm the Associate Director of Finance. My pronouns are she, her, or they, them. And I've been with Seattle Opera since about 2013. I'm really excited to do Resi work with Seattle Opera because we've looked at it in the big picture, where I actually have an opportunity to participate from the finance side, where sometimes it's been pigeonholed into a small group like the P&P department. So I'm really grateful and happy to be able to work towards making Seattle Opera more accessible and approachable to all kinds of people. On the personal side, I'm actually a member of an Indian classical dance group. So I'm always really interested in our sub-conversations about cultural appropriation and how we can work respectfully and ethically with other cultures when we're participating in art styles that span outside of the Western canon.
Yeah, fantastic. And that's something that we grapple with on the daily here in the opera world as well. Lastly, we've got Nancy, whom we heard from at the top, but Nancy, I just wanted to give you an opportunity as well to share a little bit about yourself.
Okay, just had to successfully unmute here. So yeah, Nancy Del Villarvive, and I'm the Director of Human Resources. My pronouns are she and her. It's this work, well, the work that I do at Seattle Opera as the Director of HR include many administrative type things, including recruiting, including employee relations, which is of particular interest and I think is most impacted by this work on racial equity. I'm a Mexican American. I like to say 1.5 generations. My dad was born in the US. My mom moved here when she married my dad. My dad grew up very much with an immigrant lifestyle, working in fields and mines and things like that, even though he was born in the US. So very aware of the immigrant story there. I think it's really important to me because of the position that I have in the company to make sure that we have a place that all people are comfortable working and that they have a great place to work. I enjoy, very much working with our staff, and I want to make sure that everyone has the same opportunity to be in a place where they feel like they're heard and they can make an impact. And I think this work is crucial to making sure that happens. Why I think it's special at Seattle Opera is we also have that public-facing product that we have, whether it's on stage or now broadcasted, that I think in many ways holds us publicly accountable, which I think is great, and it also helps us affect our employee work group as well, and also learn in the process.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nancy. And now I'd like to actually dig into that last bit of what you just said, both the products that our output that we produce that you can see on stage, and also some of the changes that we're hoping to implement behind the scenes, the things that you don't see on stage. And actually, I was wondering if we could start by just tackling the elephant in the room, the question, or the series of questions that we tend to get the most around this topic are questions having to do with our artistic output, because that's what the audience can see. It's the most visible element of the changes that we're making here. So, you know, a lot of the questions that we get are about racial representation on stage, and that's very important, but a big element of what you're going to be responsible for, Aaron, is increasing the diversity of the people that you don't see, the creative teams, the stage directors, the set designers, the conductors. You sort of see them a little bit in the pit. But I was wondering if you could speak to that initiative 3.3 a little bit, Aaron, this increasing the racial equity, or sorry, increasing the racial and ethnic diversity of creative teams and artists initiative. And I know we're in the early days of implementing this initiative, or all of these initiatives, but what are some of the ideas that you have for how we might go about implementing initiative 3.3?
Thank you, Alex. I forgot to mention also during my introduction that I'm an Armenian, a gay man who's an Armenian from Iran, so minority of a minority of a minority. And so therefore this work is impeccably important to me as well. And like everyone says, it's wonderful to be part of a company that takes this situation seriously and takes steps towards it. Now regarding artistic, you've just loaded a big question here.
I know, all of these
the process, so hopefully you all are ready for lots of talking. So, but in reality, it is, the first step is the simple conscious way of thinking, of putting that racial equity and social justice lens on regarding everything that you do. Just to think about it, and then becomes just like we tell singers, you know, if you sing like this is a technique, muscle memory, it'll just happen after a while. And so this is going to become part of the muscle memory of the company. Now, I will say, being here for this long, there's been several times that we've looked into who else is there we can involve into the creative process, or the conductor realm, or behind the scenes, an assistant stage manager, or choreographer. I am somewhat proud to say that I've looked into, and we do have several, you know, non-typical forming Western white European or American people joining us, and that's been through a conscious effort as well, but also in reality that the world is changing and the different cultures are being more and more introduced, or thinking that they could be part of the world of opera. So that's become helpful. So how we look at the future is to not only look at the productions or the teams that are already created, because usually, I don't know if people know, you know, when you look at opera and you can't afford to create something from your own, so you look at other companies or other places, what do they have? Can you rent them? Can you join them in a co-production? So the process is a big puzzle of steps as to how these creative teams come together. And I think not only is that the world is waking up, particularly in the United States, allowing different people from different backgrounds within the US joining these types of teams, it is also our responsibility to consciously also look for various types of individuals. I mean, I worked hard, and I think, at least from the time I've been here, for the first time, we will have a Black American conduct this season. And I'm very proud of that. I've known him since I was working in Los Angeles Opera, Khazim Abdullah. Los Angeles Opera, he was a, you know, young artist there. And so I followed him until, but it takes, the thing I'm trying to say is that for these individuals to have discovered opera, it takes some time to develop and become of the level needed for what we're looking for. We also looked for local choreographers and found this wonderful course. She happens to be an African-American, but it helps for you to think of these things as you start planning the future. So you have to always think, okay, what do we want to present to our audience? What is artistically beautiful and interesting? Because we cannot forget that, right? We can't just put things up because it matches various needs of ours. We have to first think of the art, what we're presenting, what is the story, and how do we involve various types of people that haven't been involved with this art form or part of our planning as before. And I think we've done some things very good in the past. And I think we have not done something so good in the past. And I think it's sometimes always to as much importance as we give to the level and the type of art or the beauty or the tragedy of what we're putting up, the racial question should always be as important and part of that. Now, it's not that if we start looking, all of a sudden there's going to be 200 available conductors who are not of the regular races we think of. They're actually they're not. There's not too many. So hopefully as companies like ourselves start these actions, the news in time will spread and people will feel that this art form and this business is something that they can have access to and get into and feel that they can be part of. Just like I did as an Armenian who from Iran who knew nothing of opera, right, was given access through family interest, fortunately. And so that's how I ended up in opera. I mean, I don't know anybody else from all of my friends in the past who is in opera working. I mean, it's just, you know, it takes one step, it takes introduction, but the company is responsible to present the potential of that to people by involving the creative teams, the conductors, the singers, the chorus members that we can, so that should that individual feel comfortable to come and see the opera or look into it, feel that, oh yeah, someone like me is there as well. And
Right.
that's a big message that we can send to our community and the world. So silver lining of COVID, hopefully with the streaming stuff that we're doing also, that gets to more people. And there are some great people to do. And yes, everybody else is looking for all of these people. So availability will become more difficult, but we will do our part to move forward.
Yeah, thank you for that comprehensive answer, Aaron. I think you point out
one thing. I'm sorry. One thing to interrupt. We should mention that whatever we are and we have been, we're going to be, we are an international company. We should remember that from other people's views, we do involve various cultures, whether it's Armenian, Italian, German, Spanish, Mexican, whoever, we do. But we have to make an extra step because the issue of racial injustice is different in the US and in our community. So we have to pay special attention. I'm not saying we are not inclusive and we're all, you know, straight white people doing this stuff. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that we have to take that extra step to include importance regarding issues that affect our country and our region as well. That's why these initiatives are very important.
Yeah, thank you so much. And that's an important point to point out, which is that the US has, as we all know, its own legacy of systemic inequality, and that has filtered down into the opera industry. And so the opera industry as a whole really needs to undergo a culture change in order to be a place that's more welcoming to artists and creatives of color, of you know, all elements of the opera creation process. And a big part of what Seattle Opera can contribute to that is putting the pressure on you know, these co-production design discussions and talent acquisition agents and so on, saying, no, this is what we want. Please don't keep giving us the same old, same old.
And to give you the good news, it's starting. We were already asking, we're already saying, if we're looking for new composers, publicists, we're like, well, who do you have of a different background, right? And if they're writing about a certain story, can you get, for example, for the lack of any particular title, if there is a story concentrating on Black individuals, do you have an actual Black composer who's done that? So that we can feel more related, and they can also tell the story in a different way because they would be so identifying with it. It's as if saying, let the Armenians say the story of the genocide instead of, you know, some European white person write the story of the genocide.
Yeah, absolutely. And hold on to that thought, because I'm going to, as long as we don't run out of time here, I'm going to come back to that topic toward the end.
I'm gonna mute for now.
On the subject of culture changes, Nancy, I was wondering, you're carrying a huge weight of this racial equity and social impact plan. There's, on the one hand, let me pull it up, you are responsible for Initiative 3.1, which is to implement internal hiring processes and trainings that ensure successful selection of diverse job candidates. And you're also largely responsible for all of strategic priority number 2, with some other people carrying that load as well. But strategic priority number 2 is to increase the percentage of stakeholders who understand and participate in Seattle Opera's racial equity and social impact work. I was wondering, Nancy, if we could go back to this question of implementing internal hiring processes. First of all, why is it important to have people of color in decision-making positions behind the scenes? And what are some of the changes that you've been discussing internally about making to the hiring processes within Seattle Opera to ensure that we have more diverse candidates making it through to the final rounds?
Well, I'll start with the question on why is it important to have people of color in decision-making positions. I mean, I think, like Aaron was talking about, if you have someone who is directing that is part of that culture, they're going to be able to tell the story a little bit better. I think that if you have people of color in decision-making positions, they understand some of the different nuances in making those decisions and what are those impacts of those decisions moving forward, and how they might affect people both internally and externally. I think of one example, and that was it was back quite a few years back when we were going to put Madame Butterfly on the stage again, and we were doing the preparation for that. And I think that it speaks well of our culture that our hair and makeup manager felt comfortable at that time going to the director of production and saying, I'm not going to put Asian style makeup on people who are not Asian. It's not going to, I'm not comfortable with that. And I think being able to voice that forward, bring that to people's attention, those are the types of things that might not come up if somebody else were in those roles. So I think that's just one example that kind of sticks out in my mind because it was earlier in my time at Seattle Opera, but I think there are different decision points where there are conversations going on that what we decide to do is affected by someone who has a different perspective, and we can only get that if we have people of color that are included in that process. As to the hiring process, some of the things that we're doing differently, and I think for the most part, this plan is documenting one of those things so that should I leave, should all of this group not be at Seattle Opera, that we can know that they're going to happen in the future. One of the things is incorporating questions around racial equity and social impact, and how do we identify those people that care about this work, that have some knowledge coming in about this work, so that we get a good fit in hiring someone. As well as making sure that we have a diverse pool to choose from, that our qualified candidates include diverse people, and in some cases we've extended the search longer to be able to have a multitude of people to choose from. One thing I will say that has been helped is as we've started this racial equity work, I've seen the candidate pool for all positions, artistic positions, finance positions, across the board in administration, we've seen more candidates of color coming forward because, and actually in one interview, and I always quote this, I was told, because we always ask, why do you want to come work for Seattle Opera? And the answer in this case was, well, I see what you're doing. We had just done As One, which is an opera about a transgender woman. And they said, I see what you're doing and I want to be a part of it. And I mean, that's the ideal situation for our company. And the more we can do in that respect, the more we're going to attract the people that we want and that we need and that feel comfortable joining us as an organization. So I hope I answered that question all right.
Yeah, no, you did perfectly. And I that resonates with me as well, because that was a big reason for my wanting to come and work at Seattle Opera as well. And I think it speaks the fact that we've had so many diverse recent hires, recently a number of our recent hires have been people of color, I should say, speaks to how important it is to have people of color in hiring positions, like the HR director, for example. So I think that, that in and of itself is sort of an illustration of why this is so important. And then just digging in a little bit more deeply, I'm going to turn now to questions about fundraising and finance, because I think this is a particularly fascinating aspect of this whole conversation. And let me just find my questions here that I had for that. I was wondering if we could start with Marissa, actually, our Associate Director of Finance. And Marissa, you're in charge of a particularly intriguing aspect of this work. One of the initiatives is 1.3, which is to create budgeting protocols in the accounting system that identify, prioritize, track, and monitor racial equity and social impact contributions and expenditures. I keep prefacing all of my questions with, I know we're in the early stages of implementing this plan, but what are some of what does that look like? Could you just give us a sense of what some of these new budgeting protocols might look like or might entail?
Sure. We start pretty bottom level here, because a lot of what we need to do is tracking our transactions that are quantitative, at least, and seeing how they impact our Resi planning. So we actually have the capability of assigning an attribute or tag to different transactions in our accounting software that can say this is a Resi related activity or this is not, and whether it's direct or indirect. So we're just in the early stages of implementing that, but we're going to have that tracking throughout the organization so that we can track both actual activity, actual contributions that support our Resi work, actual expenses that support the work we're doing, and then we can report on it. That's the important part. If we're not tracking it and reporting on it, it doesn't keep it high on our priorities list. So the actual the process of doing that is relatively simple from the database side. The more challenging part is really clearly defining what leads our Resi activity forward. So one of my main goals for this fall is creating a sort of a guidepost for the folks who are entering expenses and revenues to say, is this Resi? Does this encourage our Resi plan? And therefore should we track it and report on it related to our goals?
Yeah, thank you. It always gives me some heart palpitations whenever I have to go into the accounting system and enter these things, but maybe this will make it a little more fun for me, knowing that it's all going to be tracked toward contributing to our racial equity efforts.
Well, Alex, I'll also add in, because it's been some really interesting conversations with Marissa, and I think some folks here on the panel have had these too. It's really caused us to consider what are things that we're tracking that are specifically in part of the racial equity plan, and what is just part of our normal practice. And so the way that this plan is set up, and what's really beautiful about it is it should continue to be integrated, so that we're seeing more and more of that just being part of our normal finances and expenses, isn't just specifically targeted, but is just part of our normal operation. And Marissa, I just wanted to call that out, and I don't know if you have more to share about that, because I think it's just brought up a really interesting conversation internally about how we assign the dollars to that, and maybe Catherine on the fundraising side too. How do we understand those financial impacts?
Yeah, it's a really interesting challenge, because there's certain things that we do ordinarily that may affect people of color, but maybe don't really have a direct benefit towards working us towards becoming a more multicultural, anti-racist organization. So there's different factors that we have to put in play in terms of how we'll track it and how we think about its, how it prioritizes our resi work. So yeah, I think that the concepts behind the financial tracking are really critical in terms of how we move forward. And then also moving it into our budgeting process as well. So it's spread across all the departments of the organization, not confined to just one or two departments, and that we really have a way to monitor ourselves.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that or elaborating further on that. Catherine, from the development side, I was wondering if we can turn to you. What role does racial equity and social impact have in fundraising for Seattle Opera? And part of this question I'm asking is, we get a lot of comments around like to the effect of why are we bothering with this kind of work? We're an arts organization, shouldn't we be focusing on the arts and fundraising for the arts? What role does our Resi work have in contributing to our fundraising efforts? And how would you respond to the sort of the detractors against this kind of work?
Yeah, there's a lot there in those comments.
I know.
I would say that I want to just talk about like regionally specifically. We are hearing a lot from who many people would perceive as like traditional opera donors in the Northwest, who are saying to us, like, if you are not committed to racial justice work, we're not going to give you money anymore. Mm-hmm. And big thing for the development department in implementing the Resi plan is actually tracking who those people are and being able to report back to them on the implementation of this plan. As for that question about like naysayers, right? There's a perception issue and a structural issue there, right? Like there's a perception of who a donor to an opera company is supposed to be. And I will say, like, as a professional fundraiser, like anybody can be a donor. Like a gift of service, a gift of time, a gift of money, you are a donor, right? But I think it's fair to say that the racial wealth gap in America and the implications of that has reinforced this perception of what a donor looks like and how a donor behaves. And the fundraising team at Seattle Opera is not going to solve the racial wealth gap in America, but we do have a responsibility to our community to not create practices that reinforce the benefits of that, which is when I think about structure and like how the development department approaches our work. And I think most arts organizations in America have a development practice that's incredibly dependent on donor benefits, which even though there's been a huge movement over the last decade to make less transactional relationships, more transformational relationships, just the act of having a benefit system that creates a donor class and a non-donor class, and the access that provides when you make a gift at a certain level, the gatekeeping of artist relationships between the community and like one-on-one relationships between artists and donors it only happens if you give at a certain level, right? And so, I mean, Seattle Opera has a long way to go on this, but I know that, our team views and the company views any gift to Seattle Opera as an incredibly meaningful gesture in support of our work.
Yeah, thank you for that. And part of it too seems to be that, as an organization that's highly dependent on contributed revenue, fundraising, that, we're in competition with organizations that do direct, service to communities in need. And part of what I'm hearing, at least from the development department, is that our work in racial equity is part of positioning ourselves as being able to, as Seattle Opera being a place where you can donate your money and it's going to benefit communities that need it. It's not just a donation to art for art's sake, although that's very important to a lot of people too.
Yeah, I want to be a little careful there because I think, like, yes, when you give a gift to Seattle Opera, you are supporting the work that we do and you're supporting the partnerships that we have with other organizations in the city. But I do think like an important tenet of being a community-centric fundraising shop, right, is that we are mutually supportive of other nonprofits. So like if a donor was coming to me and saying, you know, I could clearly tell that there's a shift in their philanthropy and that they are interested in supporting another organization that's doing that direct service work. Like I, as a fundraiser for Seattle Opera, should not be afraid to direct them to make a gift to that organization if that's clearly what they care about and the difference they want to make in the community, right? Like it's that culture of abundance and knowing that there's more than enough money in our region to go around. And, you know, it's like, I think it's like reinforcing the difference between like transactional relationships, which are only open to those who have money, who are going to give money to the opera to get something, and a transformational relationship, which is culturally affirming, open to anyone, and definitely supportive of spreading the wealth throughout our community.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Catherine. And then tackling another huge topic here in this conversation is, and I'd like to just acknowledge that this racial equity and social impact plan has a lot of different initiatives within it. I'm not going to be able to cover them all, but some of them are quite large topics in and of themselves. And one that I'd like to talk about is Initiative 3.6, which is to ensure that Seattle Opera programs are rooted in Resi work and include diverse perspectives and topics. And this is an initiative that's sort of jointly shared, or the responsibility for it is jointly shared by our marketing department and our programs and partnerships department. I was wondering if we could start with you, Christina, from our marketing department about, and you know, once again, prefacing this question with, I know we're in the early stages of this, but what are some of the conversations that we've been having about, or can you shed some insight into some of the conversations we've been having about how to root our programs in Resi work?
Sure. I'll probably ask Alejandra to jump in here since we're working on this initiative.
And sure,
together.
Feel free, by the way.
And it's, yeah, definitely the early stages. But I think, you know, what we're trying to identify here with this initiative is what is a program as it pertains to this? Is it everything we do? Is it things that are directly interacting with the community? So that's one part we're really working to define. And then I think one of the things that everybody on the team who is working on an initiative, and as you pointed out, you know, there's probably like, I don't know, 18 or 20 initiatives here. And so the leadership team all have responsibility for multiple of them. Is one thing that we're all working on is figuring out how we don't turn back and just kind of do things the way that we always have in the past. So, and that's actually especially going to be true now, and it's kind of an additional layer for that as we've been closed during the pandemic and really shifting to another type of delivery model. And we're gonna, you know, hopefully, knock on wood, soon be back in our performance space with audiences. But really, do we really want to go back to normal when we do that, or in what ways can we shift our thinking as we're making decisions to go back to performing and offering programs in person? So I think one of the things we're talking about is kind of what kind of checklists or questions can we ask ourselves as we're making decisions about programming to make sure that we've brought in other perspectives as part of the decision making, and if the program is being rolled out exactly as it has been in the past, why, and kind of investigating that a little bit. I'll let Alejandra add on now.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no, I mean, the thing about the thing about the plan is that there are, yes, it's an early plan. It was just officially rolled out. Dominica mentioned it's been in the works for a while. And I would actually say some of these things have been part of the way that we have been operating. This one kind of falls a little bit under that. Prior to this plan, it was just a really incredible core group of staff members who are working on the programs of the organization that have that have been vocal and keeping these issues up front, right? Of, hey, let's take a look at these list of panelists again, or hey, this topic is really excluding X groups. Are we being inclusive of X, Y, and Z? And so some of that has been due to some of the people that are in the room, which is great. So what this plan does, I think it was Nancy who made this point earlier, is that it's going to help us make it a little bit more formal, which I always hesitate as I kind of move into that language, right? But because should we all, win the lottery and go live our best life, which is probably still in opera, quite frankly, but should it be something else, we might, we want to make sure that we leave that information for the folks who come next to build on. So that's one of the things I do want to call out, because some of this stuff has been happening, but we just really want to be intentional about it. And then the other part that I wanted to mention on that too is, there is, just by the nature of the work of community engagement, we are the area of the company that tends to be really at the forefront of working with communities that are not typically in our theater. And so we are often the frontline workers, and I'm going to make some generalizations. 10 years is in opera education and community engagement. I believe a lot of them are truths, but I just want to give some room to being hyperbolic, which I think makes life a little more interesting. But we are kind of the frontline workers in some ways, in terms of working with communities who don't see themselves represented in opera, who don't see themselves represented in classical music, who don't feel that they belong or that they are included, regardless of whatever, what we might say as, oh, but you're absolutely included. We have to do more. There is more work for us to do and for us to be responsible for. And so this plan really holds us accountable to that. And looking at our programs, which do tend to be broader in scope than just the artistic presentations on the stage, is a really critical way for us to ensure that what we are doing what we're saying we want to, and that we're making sure that our programs lead us to that strategic point number 3 around including diverse perspectives and being really honest and true to that.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. The subject of holding ourselves accountable. My last few questions, I was wondering if I could return to Dominica to speak to the board's involvement in oversight of this plan. And then after that, if we can just have the directorial staff who are on the panel today just speak, and anybody may speak to this, about who's responsible for and how we're going to go about tracking, monitoring, and holding ourselves accountable to implementing this plan. So if we could just start with Dominica to speak to the board's involvement.
Sure. So the board really has kind of 2 pieces to the plan, and I don't know the initiative numbers off the top of my head, but basically there's one initiative that has to do with diversifying itself as a board, and that would really fall under the responsibility of the governance committee, governance and nominations, and with the support of the development department, and of course Christina Scheppelmann, the general director. But that's part of their job, and again it's come right out of the data from the assessment. It's just that there needs to be more a deeper diversity on the board. And then the other piece is that the long range planning committee is responsible for overseeing the progress of the plan, that basically the staff leadership reports their progress on the plan to the long range planning committee. And so it's kind of a nice balance of the board having some responsibility with the plan, being able to learn from the plan, and also there's also opportunity for within the plan itself. I think there's an initiative in there somewhere that has to do with making sure that we have a broader breadth of racial equity trainings available, and the board has access to that as well.
Right, within strategic priorities.
So those are kind of the areas that where the board's involvement is. I'm sorry. So those are the areas where the board has direct involvement with the plan.
Yeah, thank you so much. And then if any of the directors in the panel would like to speak to this question of measurement, tracking, evaluation, and accountability. What's the internal mechanism that we'll use to hold ourselves accountable to following through with this plan?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Y'all can feel free to interrupt me. So stay unmuted, Aaron. I mean, that's one that we're in trouble now. That is one where we certainly are in the beginning stages of, because not everything can be measured the same. And actually Dominica can also, she's got plenty to say on this too, because she's been providing guidance around this, right? I mean, you can't measure everything with numbers. I mean, it'd be great if we can, always have a set numbers to look at or count things, or, have everybody check on the way out, how satisfied and included do you feel? And they rank us. Like, that's not always going to happen. And so a lot of the work that we are well, hold on, I've got two thoughts happening at the same time. But so a lot of the work that we're going to have to do is looking at not just the initiatives, but the work plans that we build around it, right? So, and again, this is not something I made up. Dominica is the brainchild of all of this, of how are we gonna execute these initiatives? How are we gonna get there? And within that, there are certain tasks and actions. And so what are the ways that we can measure that to make sure that we're making progress, right? It's not that we're hitting a specific benchmark all the time, but that we're making progress and moving forward, and something that we can look back year after year to say, have we met those? And some of it is going to be, I mean, sometimes there's this narrative data, and these folks have heard me say it. I mean, when you're working in social impact work and community engagement, there is a lot of it that is not numbers, it is narrative, it is storytelling. And so how do you capture that? That becomes really difficult, but that's part of our work that we're going to be doing. And how do we also capture that data and information without it being tokenizing, which that is a really critical thing, and one that we have to be really careful and intentional as we move forward, that we're making sure that that's not what we're doing, that it's not just to check the box, okay, cool, we did it, we got the one person, move forward. That's not our intention, and is not what we see as our work.
Well, I don't know why I unmuted, because you mentioned everything. You're such a bravo, beautifully done, Alejandra. Just to add a moment to that, a different way I've been thinking of how the artistic team is going to take a look at all of this. It's going back to making it part of the normal way of thinking. And also it is tracing the process of how much of this thinking we've done to make these initiatives come to fruition. It's that process. Sure, we can measure how many people of color we've paid what to, under what role and what percentage, and how does that fit to the percentage of people of color or other cultures or backgrounds or socioeconomic standards compared to what the region is. There is all of that. But again, it's about, for me personally, I will say this, and maybe I'll have to learn to change it, or maybe it'll be the right direction, but it's about measuring the process and the way we're moving forward, making those changes and those decisions. If we consciously, for example, are able to pull a production consciously thinking that it's a particular story about a minority affected within that's important for the US community, and how do we bring that creative team from various backgrounds together, and how do we put all that together, how do we make other companies be interested in that. All of those are steps that have some sort of measurement, maybe not the typical way, but there definitely is something that we can measure that we've done and we're moving forward.
Yeah, thank you. And speaking of measuring, is there the survey that we all completed as part of developing this plan, is there a plan to redeploy this survey repeatedly over the next few years?
Yeah, there is. Thank you for bringing that up. As Dominica mentioned early on, the initiatives were formed after doing a survey of our stakeholders and really understanding amongst our staff and board and crew and everybody who works for us kind of where people are on their journey in this work. And so redeploying that survey is going to help us understand if we're making progress with people who are the decision makers and are part of our workforce, if they are understand what we're doing as a company and why we're doing it, and can participate in that. So we will be redeploying that survey periodically to understand what that part of the landscape looks like. And then, other metrics that we would be working on, especially in the marketing and ticketing area, is the diversity of the participants and audiences in our program. And we'll be really looking for those to match what our region's demographics are.
Oh, thank you, Christina. And actually, in the few minutes that we've got remaining to us here, I'm going to try to get us all out of here by 1:30, as I promised. I was wondering if we could turn to some of the questions that have come in. Actually, one of the questions that came in, I think would be best addressed to you, Christina. I have been a seasoned subscriber for many years. How can subscribers take a meaningful role in these efforts at Seattle Opera?
That's such a great question, and I'm really glad somebody asked that. I think what you can do is you can let us know what we're doing well and where you think we need to do more work. We love to hear from our customers, and in fact, we actually share most of the feedback that we get through the entire administrative staff. So that's also an important evaluation of the individual one-on-one stories people have. So also, part of what we do is working in customer service, and especially as we're welcoming audiences into our buildings. And if you if anybody witnessed anything that they didn't feel like was appropriate or the type of environment that they want to be involved with as a customer, then they should definitely let us know that as well. Because we're always looking to make sure that our environment is, obviously where people are physically is a really important part of how they feel about interacting with that organization.
Yeah, thank you so much. We're getting a lot of good questions here. There's another one, perhaps Catherine, you can speak to this one. Does Seattle Opera work with corporate sponsors and foundations to ensure that their funding comes from organizations that are also committed to racial equity?
Yes. That is a huge part of what Julia Kearns-Welsh, our institutional giving officer, spends her time doing. And I would say that that's a two-way relationship, and that corporations and foundations have started asking the organizations that they give to if they meet their requirements of what racial justice work they're delivering on in their communities. And I would say, like, Dominica always brings up this story, and I think it's a really good one, that when we were in the early stages of getting board buy-in to create a racial equity social impact plan, really what sealed the deal was one of our big funders doing a site visit and essentially sharing in front of our general director at the time, our board president, and several board members that we weren't doing the work, and that if we didn't start, they were no longer going to be one of our big funders. So I think that's more how that plays out on a yearly basis for us.
Yeah, thank you so much. Aaron, this is, and I know that I asked you to hold that thought because I was going to come back to it, but a question came in about exactly that topic of having more productions that have a Black creative team, Black librettists, Black composers, or not Black necessarily, but POC. Do we have any, I know these conversations are tightly guarded, but do we have any plans for featuring works that are created by more diverse creative teams, or are you prepared to reveal any of the ideas that you have in mind, or what is the process, I guess, that Seattle Opera is undertaking to plan for incorporating more of these titles into our season?
Well, I will tell you that we're more certainly looking at what options we may have to make and do, and looking at also COVID does not make things easier as to our future planning. So we have had to completely see, do we readjust everything in the future? If so, what do we do? How do we move forward? What about all the people who lost their jobs? How do we give them back to them? So there's going to be some time there that we have to manage that aspect of the business. But also we're starting our own, whether it is chamber operas or whether it is actual titles, looking within the directors group as well. And also myself and Chapelman reaching out to creators to see what else there is, what else we can do. We are looking for different material than what people may have seen us do in the past by different creators. It is not as simple as, oh yeah, there's a show, let's go do, let's make it all happen. So it is a big puzzle piece. And I'm afraid sometimes people out there in the world do not realize what a gigantic puzzle it is simply to have a show ready and the curtain go up for them to sit in the seats and see it. I always say it's a miracle that the curtain is up. You watch a show, curtain comes down, you go like, oh yeah, that was a pretty good show. Yeah, that's fine. I mean, a miracle. But anyway, putting that aside, if it's that extreme to put something on, also imagine to lure into the world that's not used to consciously looking at different types of creative people or people of background, different backgrounds, being the composers, being the librettists, being the stuff like that. And I think we still have a lot of work to do in the future. We will keep looking, and we're doing that work right now as we plan the future. Also, it helps that through programs and partnerships and all that we've done, the Creation Lab is starting, which Alejandra can talk to about that. It's wonderful to see what kinds of local people with different backgrounds and interests are applying to be part of this program for composers and librettists, which Alejandra can talk about. But yes, we're taking conscious steps. No, I'm not willing to reveal any of the plans at this time.
But thank you. I think that was helpful.
Nice try, but no, not yet.
Get at least that elucidation into your thought process behind this. And Alejandra, if you'd like to speak to the Creation Lab, I think that might be a
yeah, I will briefly, although what I wanted to point out is that this also kind of goes back to the question you asked Nancy around what happens when you have more BIPOC voices at the table is, we, again, I generalize, apologies, but, we want to look out for our gente, we want to look out for our people. And so you end up getting some more ideas and some more artists' creation works out there on the table that may not always come up, not through any, it's nothing bad, nothing malicious, but when you have people of color at the table, you get a wider spectrum of ideas, of representation. And I mean, this isn't unique in art. There have been, I think Deloitte did this really big study in the corporate world about how you get really diverse ideas when you have diverse people. Well, yeah, that's what happens. And so that also kind of speaks to that. But the question you were asking me about is Creation Lab, which is our New Works program, which was really championed by our General Director, Christina Scheppelmann, who is really dedicated to the development of young artists. And so this is for composers and librettists in Washington State, ages 18 to 30. We just launched it, had amazing applications. We'll be announcing some finalists soon. And this is our way to ensure that we're creating a space for new voices to develop and to enter the field. And we were really conscious about ensuring that we went to partner organizations throughout our region who weren't typically engaging, their audiences aren't our typical audience, to say, we're looking for people who are composers of any kind, people who are writing texts of any kind, to both further our field in opera and also bring in diverse voices in that.
Yeah, thank you so much. One more question that came in, and Dominica, perhaps you might be best positioned to answer this question. And this is a big question. Let me preface it with that. The person asking the question says that they're not seeing more specific references of LGBTQIA plus identity or disability in our Resi plan. Why is that? Obviously, these identities are important to Seattle Opera, so why are they not explicitly mentioned? In other words, I suppose you can paraphrase it by saying, why lead with race in this conversation?
Oh,
I want to acknowledge that this is a big topic to be trying to answer in 2 minutes.
yeah, okay. So I think the first thing to note is just that intersectional conversations have been ongoing throughout all of the trainings that we've had throughout the assessment. There were questions within the racial equity and social impact survey that were very specific to intersection, and leading with race. This is one of those things in anti-racism work that when you lead with race, the same tools and tactics that you would use to dismantle racism are the same tools and tactics that you would use to dismantle other oppressions. And so that's why we lead with race. When we lead with race, we're able to we're able to envision and enact the not just the liberation of folks of color, but of all people. And so that's where we come from when we say why we lead with race. Going back to the plan itself, the plan is meant to be a plan of continuous improvement and continuing to take a look at the different areas that should be called out individually. There is one, or how do I want to say this? What you see in the plan that's been given out publicly is just the plan and the initiatives themselves. It doesn't provide definition around each and every initiative, because that's what the work plans are for. That's the work that's being done behind the scenes. And the expectation is that the work behind the scenes is supposed to be inclusive of intersection. There is one initiative that does specifically call out intersection to a certain degree, and that's 1.6, and I'm just going to look that one up really quick. It's evaluate facility and work environments from an equitable and accessible lens and implement a plan to be inclusive to employees/visitors from vulnerable groups. That was one, I'll just say that we struggled to put the wording around it, to put the definition. That was a hard one for us to word, but really that was the one that we wanted to be really, at least behind the work that's happening behind the scenes, is really about how the company is accessible to folks with disabilities, whether those are visible or invisible, how we are accessible to trans folks, and to the LGBTQ plus community, and you know, that's where I think that's a really specific call out for us. I think and I think that going back to my comment about the plan being continuous improvement, this is really our first time rolling things out to the public, and this is the first time we're hearing from you. So it's good to hear from you places that you want to hear and to see called out specifically. So please continue to give that feedback that, you know, that Christina Murty was talking about. Continue to give that feedback that you want to see more, or if you want to know more about what's happening within those work plans, within, you know, what's going on behind the scenes. Continue to ask the question. Continue to hold the company accountable.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And that's an important point there. Well, we've reached 1:32. I want to acknowledge the many questions that have come in, and I'm sorry that we weren't able to get to all of them, but I appreciate everybody who submitted questions. And if there are questions that we can address offline, we'll certainly make an effort to do that. Before we all sign off, I just wanted to thank not just all of the attendees for tuning in and listening, and for also committing yourselves to holding us accountable to what we've discussed today. I want to thank all of the panelists, of course, for the insights that you've shared with us today from your various departments. And I also want to thank my colleagues working behind the scenes today, Gabrielle Nomura-Gaynor and TJ Callahan, for handling the inflow of questions that have come in, as well as Caroline Webb, our Stewardship and Events Manager, who time and time again dauntlessly steps up to the task of hosting our Zoom webinars. And I'd like to say a special thank you to you, Dominica, our now former Associate Director of Administration. I know that I speak on behalf of the entire Seattle Opera staff when I say how deeply indebted we are to you for your leadership on this plan, for your leadership of the equity team, and for your efforts on so many other initiatives that you've undertaken at Seattle Opera. You'll be desperately missed here at Seattle Opera, and we of course wish you all the best on this wonderful new opportunity that you are stepping into. And just reiterating what Christina Scheppelmann said at the top of our event here today, I know that by moving on, the wider Puget Sound region community as a whole will be able to benefit from your experience and your values and your knowledge and expertise. So thank you for everything that you've done here at Seattle Opera, and thank you for coming back and joining us today. So thank you, everyone in the audience.
Thank you, Alex. I've said it before. Go ahead.
Thank you, Dominica. Yeah, thank you for tuning in, and like I said, holding us accountable to this plan in the years going forward.